Middle school, grades 6, 7, and 8, 11, 12, and 13 years old. In this section, we will use the term adolescent for the first time. Although it may strike you as odd to think of 11 and 12-year-olds as adolescents, developmental psychologists typically add this term to individuals as young as 10 years of age. They typically apply this term to individuals as young as 10. The reason they do is because adolescence involves a series of transitions, biological, social, emotional, and cognitive, for example, to a more mature life stage, some of which may begin in some individuals as early as 10 years of age. Although a variety of terms are used to denote the initial period of change that marks the adolescent years, ages 10 to 14, we use two of the more popular, early adolescence and emerging adolescence. Physical characteristics, middle school. Physical growth tends to be both rapid and uneven. During the middle school years, the average child will grow 2 to 4 inches per year and gain 8 to 10 pounds per year. But some parts of the body, particularly the hands and feet, grow faster than others. Consequently, middle school children tend to look gangly and clumsy. Because girls mature more rapidly than boys, their growth spurt begins at about age 11, reaches a peak at about age 14, and is generally complete by age 15. The growth spurt for boys begins on average at about age 13, peaks at about age 17, and is generally complete by age 18. The result of this timing difference in the growth spurt is that many middle school girls look considerably older than boys of the same age. After the growth spurt, however, the muscles in the average boy's body are larger, as are the heart and lungs. A brief summary of the types of behavior stressed by the theorists discussed in the preceding chapter is found in Table 3.4. Applying theories of development to the middle school years. Psychosocial development. Transition from industry versus inferiority to identity versus role confusion. Growing independence leads to initial thoughts about identity. There is greater concern about appearance and gender roles than about occupational choice. Cognitive development. Beginning of formal operational thought for some. There is increasing ability to engage in mental manipulations and test hypotheses. Moral development, transition to morality of cooperation, conventional level. There is increasing willingness to think of rules as flexible mutual agreements, yet official rules are still likely to be obeyed out of respect for authority or out of a desire to impress others. General factors to keep in mind. A growth spurt and puberty influence many aspects of behavior. An abrupt switch occurs for 6th graders from being the oldest, biggest, most sophisticated students in elementary school to being the youngest, smallest, least knowledgeable students in middle school. Acceptance by peers is extremely important. Students who do poor schoolwork begin to feel bitter, resentful, and restless. Awareness grows of a need to make personal value decisions regarding dress, premarital sex, and code of ethics. Research on early and later maturation shows that differences in physical maturation are likely to produce specific differences in later behavior. Because of their more adult-like appearance, early maturing boys are likely to be more popular with peers, have more positive self-concepts, and have more friends among older peers. But friendships with older adolescents put early maturing boys at greater risk for delinquency, drug and alcohol abuse, truancy, and increased sexual activity. In addition, recent studies suggest that early maturing boys may be more susceptible to depression. As adults, early maturers were more likely to be responsible, cooperative, self-controlled, conforming, and conventional. Late maturing boys, by contrast, are likely to have relatively lower self-esteem and stronger feelings of inadequacy. Like their early maturing counterparts, they may also be more susceptible to depression than their on-time peers. but later in adolescence, they show higher levels of intellectual curiosity, exploratory behavior, and social initiative. As adults, late maturing boys are more impulsive, assertive, insightful, and inventive. Because early maturing girls are taller and heavier than their peers and don't have a thin and leggy fashion model look, they are likely to have lower self-esteem and are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and panic attacks. They are more likely to be popular with boys, particularly older boys, and experience more pressure to date and become sexually active than their more normally developing peers. Late maturing girls, whose growth spurt is less abrupt and whose size and appearance more closely reflect the feminine stereotype mentioned, share many of the characteristics, positive self-concept, popularity, of the early maturing boys. Late maturing girls are more likely to be seen by peers as attractive, sociable, and expressive. If late maturing boys in your class appear driven to seek attention or inclined to brood about their immaturity, you might try to give them extra opportunities to gain status and self-confidence by succeeding in schoolwork or other non-athletic activities. If you notice that early maturing girls seem insecure, you might try to bolster their self-esteem by giving them extra attention and by recognizing their achievements. Pubertal development is evident in practically all girls and in many boys. From age 11 through 13, most girls develop sparse pubic and underarm hair and exhibit breast enlargement. In boys, the testes and scrotum begin to grow, and lightly pigmented pubic hair appears. Concern and curiosity about sex are almost universal, especially among girls. For girls in the United States, puberty can begin as early as age 7 or as late as age 13. For boys, the onset of puberty can be as early as age 9 or as late as age 13 and a half. Because sexual maturation involves drastic biological and psychological adjustments, children are concerned and curious. It seems obvious that accurate, unemotional answers to questions about sex are desirable. However, for your own protection, you should find out about the sex education policy at your school. Many school districts have formal programs approved by community representatives and led by designated educators. Informal, spur-of-the-moment class discussions may create more problems than they solve. The impact of early and late maturation. Early maturing boys, self-confident, high in self-esteem, likely to be chosen as leaders, but leadership tendencies more likely in low socioeconomic status boys than in middle-class boys. More likely to socialize with older peers and engage in substance abuse, delinquent behavior. As adults, early maturing boys are more self-confident, responsible, cooperative, sociable, but also more rigid, moralistic, humorless, and conforming. Late maturing boys, energetic, bouncy, given to attention-getting behavior, poor body image, lower self-esteem, lower aspirations for educational achievement, not popular. As adults, late maturing boys are impulsive and assertive, but also insightful, perceptive, creatively playful, able to cope with new situations. Early maturing girls, more likely to date older boys, lower self-esteem, lacking in poise, but middle-class girls more confident than those from low socioeconomic groups, more likely to date, smoke, and drink earlier, greater likelihood of eating disorders and depression. As adults, more self-possessed, self-directed, able to cope, emotionally stable, wide range of interests. Late maturing girls, confident, outgoing, assured, popular, likely to be chosen as leaders. As adults, likely to experience difficulty adapting to stress, less agreeable, more likely to exhibit fluctuating moods. Social characteristics in middle school. The development of interpersonal reasoning leads to greater understanding of the feelings of others. Robert Selman has studied the development of interpersonal reasoning in children. Interpersonal reasoning is the ability to understand the relationship between motives and behavior among a group of people. The results of Selman's research are summarized in Table 3.6. The stages outlined there reveal that during the elementary school years, children gradually grasp the fact that a person's overt actions or words do not always reflect inner feelings. They also come to comprehend that a person's reaction to a distressing situation can have many facets. Toward the end of the elementary school years and increasingly during adolescence, children become capable of taking a somewhat detached and analytical view of their own behavior, as well as the behavior of others. By mid-adolescence, they can, for example, understand that offering unsolicited academic help to a classmate may embarrass that individual. Selman believes that teachers and therapists might be able to aid children who are not as advanced in role-taking skills as their age mates by helping them become more sensitive to the feelings of others. If an 8-year-old boy is still functioning at the egocentric level, for example, he may fail to interpret the behavior of classmates properly and become a social isolate. Selman describes how one such boy was encouraged to think continually about the reasons behind his social actions and those of others, and acquired sufficient social sensitivity to learn to get along with others. Discussion techniques Selman recommends can be introduced in a natural rather than a formal way. If you see a boy react with physical or verbal abuse when jostled by a playmate, for example, you might say, "You know, people don't always intentionally bump into others. Unless you are absolutely sure that someone has hurt you on purpose, it can be a lot pleasanter for all concerned if you don't make a big deal out of it." The desire to conform reaches a peak during the middle school years. Early adolescents find it reassuring to dress and behave like others, and they are likely to alter their own opinions to coincide with those of a group. When you encourage student participation in class discussions, you may need to be alert to the tendency for students at these grade levels to be reluctant to voice minority opinions. If you want them to think about controversial issues, it may be preferable to invite them to write their opinions anonymously rather than voice them in front of the class. Because early adolescents are often so concerned with receiving social approval from their peers, they may adapt their explanations of school performance to suit this purpose. This tendency was demonstrated by Gianna Juvenin in a study of 4th, 6th, and 8th graders. These students were asked to imagine that they had received a low score on an important exam, and then to indicate how they would explain their performance to teachers and peers. The results may surprise you. The 4th and 6th graders were willing to explain their poor performance to both teachers and peers as being due to low ability rather than to low effort, whereas the 8th graders were much more likely to offer that explanation to their peers than to their teacher. This seems counterintuitive. Why would adolescents want to portray themselves to their peers as being dumb, to put it crudely? The answer is that ability is seen by many adolescents as something beyond their control. See our account of Carol Dweck's work along this line in Chapter 11. They therefore conclude that ascribing poor performance to low ability rather than to low effort will result in expressions of sympathy rather than contempt. It wasn't Matthew's fault that he got a low grade on the last math exam. He just doesn't have a head for numbers. Stages of interpersonal reasoning described by Selman. Stage 1, egocentric level, about ages 4 to 6. Children do not recognize that other persons may interpret the same social event or course of action differently from the way they do. They do not reflect on the thoughts of self and others. They can label the overtly expressed feelings of others, but do not comprehend cause and effect relations of social actions. Social information, role taking, about ages 6 to 8. This is stage 1. Children are able to, in limited ways, to differentiate between their own interpretations of social interactions and the interpretations of others, but they cannot simultaneously think of their own view and those of others. Stage 2, self-reflective role-taking, about ages 8 to 10. Interpersonal relations are interpreted in specific situations whereby each person understands the expectations of the other in that particular context. Children are not yet able to view the two perspectives at once, however. Stage 3, multiple role-taking, about ages 10 to 12. Children become capable of taking a third-person view, which permits them to understand the expectations of themselves and of others in a variety of situations, as if they were spectators. Stage 4, social and conventional system taking, about ages 12 to over 15. Each individual involved in a relationship with another understands many of the subtleties of the interactions involved. In addition, a societal perspective begins to develop. That is, actions are judged by how they might influence all individuals, not just those who are immediately concerned. Pause and reflect. During the middle school years, the peer group becomes the general source for rules of behavior. Why? What advantages and what disadvantages does this create? Emotional characteristics, middle school. The view of early adolescence as a period of storm and stress appears to be an exaggeration. Starting with G. Stanley Hall, who wrote a pioneering 2-volume text on adolescence in 1904, some theorists have described adolescence as a period of turmoil. Feelings of confusion, anxiety, and depression, extreme mood swings, and low levels of self-confidence are felt to be typical of this age group. Some of the reasons cited for this turbulence are rapid changes in height, weight, and body proportions, increases in hormone production, the task of identity formation, increased academic responsibilities, and the development of formal operational reasoning. Since the 1970s, however, a number of psychologists have questioned whether turmoil is universal during the emerging adolescent and later years. Current evidence suggests two things. First, that adolescents experience more intense positive and negative emotions than do adults. And second, even though many adolescents experience social and emotional problems from time to time and experiment with risky behavior, most do not develop significant social, emotional, or behavioral difficulties. For example, although most adolescents will have been drunk at least once before high school graduation, relatively few will develop drinking problems or allow alcohol to adversely affect their academic or social lives. Those adolescents who do exhibit a consistent pattern of delinquency, substance abuse, and depression are likely to have exhibited these behaviors as children. In other words, problems displayed during adolescence are not necessarily problems of adolescence. Although emotional turmoil during adolescence is not universal, some students do find this to be a difficult time and suffer from feelings of anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression. A major contributor to these debilitating emotions is the transition from the elementary to the middle school grades. Among the concerns that some students have as they make this shift are having several teachers who vary in their demands and teaching styles, getting lost in an unfamiliar building, having to make new friends, being picked on by older students, having more assignments that are also more difficult, and getting low grades. One key to being able to cope with these demands is a strong sense of self-esteem and self-efficacy. In the next section, Cognitive Characteristics, middle school, We describe what teachers can do to promote these self-perceptions by helping students meet academic demands. As a result of the continued influence of egocentric thought, middle school students are typically self-conscious and self-centered. Because emerging adolescents are acutely aware of the physical and emotional changes that are taking place within them, they assume that everyone else is just as interested in and is constantly evaluating their appearance, their feelings, and behavior. Consequently, they are deeply concerned about such matters as what type of clothing to wear for special occasions, with whom they should and should not be seen in public. They should never be seen with their parents at the mall, for example, and how they greet and talk with various people. Another manifestation of adolescent egocentrism is the assumption that adults do not, indeed cannot, understand the thoughts and feelings of early adolescents. It's as if the early adolescent believes she is experiencing things no one else has ever experienced before. Hence, a teen or preteen will likely say to a parent, "You just don't know what it feels like to be in love." Given the importance of social and emotional forces in the lives of middle school, as well as younger and older students, it makes sense to ask if schools can positively enhance their development. The answer is yes. For some time now, schools around the country have run what are called social and emotional learning programs. These programs typically have the following goals: recognizing and managing emotions, adopting realistic goals, understanding how others think and feel, creating positive relationships, making sound decisions, and getting along with others. Research shows that when these programs are carried out properly, students show significant growth in social and emotional skills, attitudes towards self and others, positive social behaviors and achievement, and they show significant decreases in behavior problems, depression, anxiety, and social withdrawal. Cognitive characteristics, middle school. Because of the psychological demands of early adolescence, middle school students need a classroom environment that is open, supportive, and intellectually stimulating. Early adolescence is an unsettling time for students because of changes in their physical development, their social roles, their cognitive development, and sexuality. As we noted in the previous section, another source of stress is coping with the transition from the elementary grades to a middle school, which often begins in 6th grade, or junior high, which typically begins in 7th grade. Partly because of these personal and environmental stresses, the self-concept, academic motivation, and achievement levels of adolescents decline, sometimes drastically. Are schools at all to blame for these problems? Perhaps they are. Several researchers provide persuasive evidence that these negative changes are due in part, perhaps, in large part, to the fact that the typical school environment does not meet the needs of developing students, adolescents. Their argument is based on an analysis of the psychological needs of early adolescents and the kinds of changes that take place in classroom organization, instruction, and climate as one moves from the last of the elementary grades to the first of the middle school or junior high grades. Although the typical middle school classroom is much improved in meeting students' needs for a sense of community, acceptance, and belonging, the environment continues to be largely incompatible with students' intellectual needs. Common problems include these. Instead of providing students with opportunities to make decisions about such things as classroom rules, seating arrangements, homework assignments, and time spent on various tasks, teachers impose most of the requirements and limit the choices students can make. In one study, most middle school students, grades 6 through 8, characterized their classroom activities as less interesting and enjoyable, and as providing fewer opportunities for choice than did students in grades 3 through 5. Competition and social comparisons among students increase as a result of such practices as whole class instruction, ability grouping, normative grading, also called grading on the curve, a practice we discuss in Chapter 14, assessment of classroom learning, and public evaluations of one's work. Small group instruction is infrequent, and individualized instruction almost never occurs. This stressful atmosphere does not go unnoticed by students. Compared with adolescents from 11 other countries, middle school students in the United States were more critical of their school's climate and felt more socially isolated. Many classroom tasks in middle school or junior high involve low-level seat work, verbatim recall of information, and little opportunity for discussion or group work. In one study of 11 junior high school science classes, the most frequent activity was copying information from the board or textbook onto worksheets. This emphasis on rote learning and recall has unfortunately been intensified in recent years by the growth of statewide learning standards, standardized testing, and accountability. We say unfortunately because this type of testing and these approaches to accountability discourage teachers from using instructional methods that foster meaningful learning. Students perceive their relationships with their teachers as being less friendly, less supportive, and less caring than those in earlier grades. When middle schools fail to provide students with an intellectually challenging yet emotionally safe classroom environment, one negative consequence is an effect on motivation. Theorists like Carol Dweck describe achievement goals as being either mastery or performance. Students who subscribe to a mastery goal are primarily interested in understanding ideas and their interrelationships, acquiring new skills and refining them over time. Students who subscribe to a performance goal are primarily interested in demonstrating their ability to finish first, however that is defined, and avoiding situations in which a relative lack of ability would be apparent. Mastery goals have been associated with positive feelings about one's ability, potential in the subject matter, and with the use of effective learning strategies, which we describe in Chapter 9, Social Cognitive Theory. The most recent evidence suggests that as students move from the elementary grades to the middle grades, there is a shift in their values and practices that leads to more of an emphasis on performance goals. Some researchers blame this change on teaching practices. For example, middle grade teachers are more inclined to post papers and exams with the highest scores to grade on a curve, to accord special privileges to high achievers, and to remind students of the importance of getting high grades and producing mistake-free papers. Such an environment tells students that meaningful learning is not necessarily expected and that supportive learning will not be provided. Students then are motivated to focus on their scores and grades rather than on what they can learn. Self-efficacy becomes an important influence on intellectual and social behavior. As we mentioned in point 1 under social characteristics middle school children become capable of analyzing both their own views of an interpersonal interaction and those of the other person. This newfound analytic ability is also turned inward, resulting in evaluations of one's intellectual and social capabilities. Albert Bandura, a leading theorist we will discuss later in the book, coined the term self-efficacy to refer to how capable people believe they are at dealing with one type of task or another. Thus, a student may have a very strong sense of self-efficacy for math. I know I can solve most any algebraic equation. A moderate degree of self-efficacy for certain athletic activities. I think I play baseball and basketball about as well as most other kids my age. And a low sense of self-efficacy for interpersonal relationships. I'm just not good at making friends. These self-evaluative beliefs influence what activities students choose and for how long they will persist at a given task. particularly when progress becomes difficult. Students with a moderate to strong sense of self-efficacy will persist at a task long enough to obtain the success or corrective feedback that leads to expectations of future success. Students with a low sense of self-efficacy, however, tend to abandon tasks at the first sign of difficulty, thereby establishing a pattern of failure, low expectations of future success, and task avoidance. Because self-efficacy beliefs grow out of personal performance, observation of other people doing the same thing, and verbal persuasion, you can help students develop strong feelings of self-efficacy by following the suggestions we will make in later chapters about modeling and imitation, learning strategies, and effective forms of instruction.